Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, January 11th, 2022, at 1/11/22, I guess, if you're writing out the date that way. I don't know if that means anything to you, but if it does, let me know. You can text us, use Twitter to reach us here, and use the KITM hashtag to tell us if you figured out the numerology of the day. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. That's my fault, largely, but thanks to Justice for helping us out and enabling us to bother you this morning. Bill tells us all the way from Portland, Maine, of course, that the show is live now. This is true. The title of it, in case I didn't mention it, Kagro in the Morning. Okay. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, your host. If I can get just 10 Republican senators on board, I can have Joan McCarter on as a special guest. So make those calls, people. Be firm but polite. You know the number. Call them up at the Capitol and make sure that you get 10 on board. True, we're going to need to be able to break the filibuster in order to be able to talk about breaking the filibuster. Very much like Senate procedure. And that procedure very much in the news. I see it this morning. I don't know whether this stems from something this morning or something from late last night or the last 10 years that we've been dealing with Joe Manchin or what. But someone pointing out here, let's see, on the reporting of Chad Pergram, Manchin, speaking on the filibuster, says it's been the tradition of the Senate here in, that's what it says, it's been the tradition of the Senate here in, whatever that means, 232 years now. Probably 232 years now. Of course, that's not actually fact either, but he also says it wrong in addition to getting the facts wrong. We need to be very cautious about what we do. That's what we've always had for 232 years. That's what makes us different than any place else in the world. And, of course, that is wrong. And, of course, Ian Boudreau pointing out this morning, well, the other part of the news, which is that everyone is pointing out that the Manchin quote here is factually wrong in the deluded belief that getting the facts correct is in any way important to what he's saying. That you should certainly keep in mind. Not that you shouldn't yell at him about it. If you've got the spare time to do it, go for it, I guess. You know he's wrong. It's just that he doesn't care that he's wrong. And that sounds kind of like it might be right to most people. And I don't know exactly why it sounds like a convincing argument that things have been this way for this long. But we're sort of attuned to that as human beings. And we tend to think that it's important if things have been done this way the whole time that we continue and do it that way. And, I don't know, there's no particular logic to it, but it's a thing that they do, and it's a thing that Manchin relies on. So, all right. Well, at any rate, as I mentioned in the morning post, today being the 11th, that gives us less than a week. I guess next Monday will be the observance of the Martin Luther King holiday. And that is currently anyway, the self-imposed, really, deadline for Chuck Schumer, who laid out his plan for making the next attempt, anyway, at moving the filibuster out of the way in some way, shape, or form in order to make room for legislation that would protect voting rights in this country. And it makes sense, it's the sort of thing you would like to deliver by Martin Luther King Day, being that was such an important civil right in Martin Luther King's mind. And, of course, all of us, it should be protecting. It's actually has, if you feel like it, if you're the kind of person who's, I guess, uncomfortable tying it to race, voting rights protection, you could, if you really wanted to, sell this entirely in service to white people and their interest in being able to vote too. But they're not usually the ones that are being targeted by Republican operatives in all of this. just because, and it's just statistics that they're using to do it and nothing else. But, white people might have an interest in making sure their votes are counted too. Why they wouldn't also be interested in having their neighbors' votes counted, well, that's a matter of, typically speaking, whether they're Republicans or not. This is what their political registration is, essentially. There's a party now that kind of revolves around that, and their central reason for being is preventing enough people from being able to vote preventing enough people to be able to vote such that the majority's will can't be reflected in the outcome, because if that's the case, they'll lose. And Trump, just comes out and says it all the time. I don't know whether he means to say it this way or not, but he's on the record, I don't know, at least 4 or 5 times saying if everybody gets to vote, if the Democrats get their way and everybody who's eligible gets to vote and have a say in their government, Republicans will never win another election again. I don't know whether that's really the case, but I'm willing to stipulate that it might be. And I'd like to work towards the outcome in which that's true. But, the real world outcome in which that's true. But in his imagining, that's the case. And that's fine with me. I don't mind. That's a great selling point. One of the few things that I think he sells attractively. Anyway, let's see. Other things to catch up on today that people are sending our way. Let's see. A number of new stray COVID cases and a few, as a matter of fact, Athena 5000 noting for us today that one of the recent deaths that I think we didn't note specifically on the air, but another, anti-vax right-wing podcaster guy who, mysteriously caught the virus, and I believe he died, although this is an older article that says he's hospitalized and on a ventilator. But I think I've seen elsewhere that Doug Kuzma, is that right? Kuzma, anti-vax podcaster Doug Kuzma, I believe is actually dead. But if not, he should be. So there. How's that? Was that a good conclusion for all this? He's a good friend of Lynn Woods, and really that's reason enough. But also a anti-vaxxer and a COVID disinformer. And, he's well matched to his fate. We'll say that. At any rate, I'm looking at a December 26th article that was sent along by Athena, not as proof of the matter asserted that he is, that I've asserted that he's dead, but rather just to note for the record that this guy, this Doug Kuzma, was from her area. Sort of local boy makes bad and ends up in the ICU on a ventilator, and just sort of noting with some sort of, the sort of odd glee that we take in these examples on the show. What area is that? He's in the hospital in, he's from, See, I'm not really sure. This is interesting. This has some mixed facts here. What am I looking at here? Business Insider. And I don't know. I guess they need some editing work here. I was just reading down the bullet points in the top of the thing. You know how they love to put the bullets at the top. The first bullet is anti-vax podcaster Doug Kuzma is reportedly hospitalized in Pennsylvania and hooked up to a ventilator. So I said, oh, are you from Pennsylvania? Reading along. Let's see. There's, by the way, Kuzma contracted the virus at a right-wing event earlier this month, according to his podcast network. I think that was the equine, the equestrian center event down in Florida, where they all caught it in the green room and started off by saying that they had been. Oh no, wait a minute, that was the church event where they said they all got. They were claiming they all got anthrax because they got it through the church fog machines, which we were never able to really quite understand why a church had fog machines. But the real question is why a church had anthrax. And they didn't. So I think that's the event that we were talking about. The Equine Center was, I think, the doctors' convention. But it was also, I think, early December, and that one was in Florida. Anyway, third bullet point, by the way, in case you were wondering, is that Doug, this is a quote, Doug needs heavy, heavy prayers. A Telegram message from his podcast network said, and I don't think I've ever really heard prayers described that way with that particular adjective, heavy. I need a heavy prayer, and I guess, I don't know. Well, okay. Well, I guess he did need them. Now he needs them, I guess, if you're concerned about his fate in the afterlife. So I guess if you're got any heavy prayers around that you want to get rid of, this is as good a use for them as any. The confusing part, though, is that the first line in the actual body of the article is anti-vax podcaster Doug Kuzma has contracted the coronavirus and is now hooked up to a ventilator at a Virginia hospital, according to attorney Lynn Wood and his podcast network. So now the question is he from Pennsylvania? Is he from Virginia? Is Athena from Pennsylvania? Is Athena from Virginia? We don't know. I'm sure she's answered by now, and I haven't switched back to look, but we'll get you an answer as soon as our investigators are able to work it out for you. My first inclination is to say that as between the claim that he is hospitalized in Pennsylvania and the claim by attorney Lynn Wood that he is hospitalized in Virginia, I got to go with Pennsylvania on that one. Not because I know anything about Doug Kuzma, but because I know something about Lynn Wood, and he's probably wrong about that. Scott Anderson confirms that he is dead. It's been a couple of days now. I mean, it's coming up on 3 weeks, I guess, since this other one. So, at any rate, there you have it. So, I guess by way of not passing on incorrect information, I should tell you that anti-vax podcaster Doug Kuzma did contract the coronavirus and was hooked up to a ventilator. We just don't know where the hospital was, and it doesn't matter except insofar as which coroner will be asked to tell us the cause of death. As to whether he needed heavy prayers, it is possible that he needed very light prayers, and that is also misinformation. We don't know. But we can also tell you that, I mean, unless you're, like I said, now you want to shift to praying for his fate in the afterlife, I suppose. Anyway, the whole point really was we were supposed to learn where Athena was from, and now we haven't. But okay. And she's answered and says, oh, all right, well, he's dead. I was just surprised to see this in Business Insider that he lived near me. But when? And at what point did he live near you? While he was in the hospital? Before he went into the hospital? Did Lynn Wood move him to Virginia? We'll never know. Unless we find out, in which case that was the wrong thing to say. Okay, so let's see. Where are we here? So plenty of people pointing out his death. And let's see. Are any of these really good articles? Let's see. Yahoo News has it, although they have it in the sports section. That's interesting. I don't know if people were betting on whether or not he was going to die. I don't think he was an athlete because, he had certain comorbidities. We'll say. What does this Yahoo article have to say about things? And let's see. Absinthe has sent something along about with the headline of his death. It'll tell us which right-wing rally he attended as well. Let's go to that because it's a little easier to deal with than on the phone. I wonder why it was in the sports section. Well, he's wearing a tracksuit. Does that count as sports now? Anyway, he was a great father, his daughter Amanda Kuzma told the Daily Beast. But that's all over now. And what can I tell you? Let's see. Which right-wing gathering did he attend? I'm curious about that one. Kuzma is from Newport News. So in all likelihood, he was in the hospital in Virginia. And this is from HuffPost, and I trust them. So let's take that as a cue for where Athena's from. I don't know where Pennsylvania came into it, but when it did, it was wrong, I guess. I mean, I don't know. They could have put him in the hospital in Pennsylvania. What's the right-wing gathering that he attended? Just to be certain. The Reawaken America event in Dallas early in December. Okay. I've seen this guy's network mentioned a few times here. But yeah, I'm pretty sure this is the guy. This is the gathering at which Mike Flynn types were claiming that they had been poisoned with anthrax. Now that he's dead, of course, they can do an autopsy and tell you, nah, it didn't have anything to do with anthrax. That guy was crazy. So now we'll have a final determination. Okay, just thought I would point that out to you, since it was exciting enough for Athena. If it's good enough for her, it's good enough for me. Let's see. Oh, and she also has sent me the sorryantivaxxer.com entry on it. There are many more cases floating around. I have to note for the record that Congresswoman Nancy Mace, who represents the Charleston area in South Carolina, and my parents who live outside of Charleston, and widely considered to be, at least within the context of today's crazy Republican Party, to be something of a moderate, although she's also something of an a-hole and a big mouth. And I recall, she made the news, I think, for us most recently, fighting with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez about something or other. And I think I even looked it up last night. It was so inconsequential that even from last night, I can't remember exactly what the fight was about. But she saw an opportunity to fight with AOC and took it, and it didn't do her any good, except it did give her COVID, which, I don't think that was actually the cause, but hey, who knows? I'm willing to investigate. And isn't it irresponsible to speculate that that wasn't the cause? What's remarkable about this is, of course, she's a moderate, and these days what's probably in circulation in her area is Omicron, and people like to say that that's mild, even though Greg reminds us that that's probably not a great word for it, because it gives people the wrong impression. So I just wanted to point out that as a moderate, she has gotten moderate COVID, but she's gotten it twice, which is fantastic. She's consistent. She hasn't gotten Omicron twice, but this is her second go-around with, the big hoax that you don't have to do anything about or whatever. I think she's vaccinated. I guess she's not really much of a masker, because she's got to walk a fine line in South Carolina. I don't know. I guess you could probably, if you want to, you can walk around lying about your vaccine status. It's just more difficult to lie about masks, because, you either have one on or you don't. Not that that would stop most Republicans. Lynn Wood could probably pull it off, and Donald Trump would look at you, right face to face and tell you he's wearing a mask, and he's not wrong. He is. It's just made of face paint is all. So anyway, I just thought that was of some interest, that she would have a second go-round. Let's see, other things worthy of morning mention. Well, gosh, there's a lot of longer read things to get to. This is an exciting development. Let me take from Hunter's write-up on Daily Kos about this, because this is kind of a fun story, and it's always fun to read his version of it. And there are a few others that dive into the mechanics of it, but for the top line on the story, the 14th Amendment, as you know, bars insurrection plotters from government. People have been saying for a long time, since a year now, since January 6th, that we ought to be exercising that provision of the 14th Amendment to bar the service in Congress of some of the, most the most frequently suspected Republican members who are most frequently what the hell am I saying? Republican members who are most frequently suspected of having the most to do with the plotting and execution of January 6th. And we're talking here, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, possibly Madison Cawthorn, Paul Gosar, almost certainly, Louis Gohmert, were widely expected to have had something to do with it, several members. And, what if you were able to establish that they did have some either advanced knowledge or even helped in the planning, as has previously been floated about members giving tours to the rioter groups on January 5th, etc. And what if you took the 14th Amendment's provision seriously? What if you took any of the provisions of the Constitution seriously, for instance, and actually tried to enforce them? One of them, the Second Amendment, it is widely believed, was written by God himself and handed down as an essential part of religious practice and patriotism, that you can have guns. And what part of fill in the blank do you not understand? It's keep and bear, even though you guys continue to insist that you have the right to keep and bear them, even when you forget them in the bathroom. You're supposed to keep it. The right was to keep it. You forfeited that right by leaving it in the bathroom. And why isn't that a regular interpretation of the Second Amendment? And they write the militia parts and the well-regulated parts out all the time. So the hope of being able to enforce the 14th Amendment seriously, probably pretty distant. And we haven't done it since the Civil War. So therefore, Joe Manchin would tell you can't do it now. Because why not? Because the provision is old. And for the last 100 and something years, we've been doing it this way, i.e. not kicking anybody out of Congress. And so therefore, that's the way it has to be. And he might even tell you that we've had the 14th Amendment for 232 years. You just didn't know it for the first 100. It was hidden, written in invisible ink, like the yes and no Constitution. And, do not use the invisible ink pen on this portion until 1867 or 8. When did we pass? I don't know, 1865, I would guess. Immediately following? All right. I don't know. I should know the date on the 14th Amendment. Doesn't matter for these purposes. The 14th Amendment bars insurrection plotters from government. It's about to be tested. That's the real point. And here, a nice, lovely picture of Madison Cawthorn and his asymmetrical hairstyle popping up on one side like some sort of weird adolescent Max Headroom. And the article. Now, that's what you came here for. The House Republican caucus is, at this point, comprised almost exclusively of terrible people, but somehow North Carolina's Representative Madison Cawthorn is forever among the worst. It could be the weird Hitler fetish. That's a good point, too. It could be his habit of lying about his own past. It could be his promotion of conspiracy theories, his contempt for House rules, his support for sedition. Wait, the last one might be worst. Having a weird desire to visit Adolf Hitler's vacation home is sketchy, but looking to overthrow the government because dear leader believes Italian satellites turned all the ballots into bamboo, or whatever the hell it is he currently thinks, is definitely the most pertinent one here. A group of 11 North Carolinians who definitely do not want a forever lying fascism fetishist representing them, have now filed a challenge to Cawthorn's 2022 candidacy, already declared, as you may know, and the challenge centers Cawthorn's support for the attempted nullification of a U.S. election. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified immediately after the Civil War, bars those who mount an insurrection against the government from candidacy for federal office, and there's a solid case to be made that Cawthorn's personal actions to promote and abet the January 6th insurrection falls squarely in the definition of insurrection that the amendment and over a century's worth of court decisions have spelled out. I want to pause here just for a second and note the particular genius of hanging the insurrection label on the activities of January 6th from the get-go. It's terrific, and it's the sort of thing that if you had called it anything else, like, actually, for a while, I thought, maybe it would be interesting to call it an insurgency and talk about the people who participated in it as insurgents, because we have been conditioned, we are at that point, we had been conditioned some years earlier to think in a certain way about those words, since we used them for the lingering pro-Saddam, or Fedayeen Saddam, remember them? The pro-Saddam forces, at least the anti-U.S. forces inside Iraq post-Saddam. And we all sort of had that, feeling about who insurgents were and what an insurgency was. And they, were already dressed up in all the negative impressions that you would need to seamlessly move to a negative impression of what happened on January 6th, in case the events themselves didn't do it. But perhaps hanging insurrection on it was the real genius, because, if we had called it anything else, insurgency or just riot or whatever, and you now read the 14th Amendment to conservatives, they would say, no, it says insurrection. And that has a very specific definition, and they would argue about whether the definition is there, but they would just point to the fact that a different word is being used, and so therefore this can't be, or it's not even a bad thing, and they're sort of still trying to do that anyway. But the fact that everybody is used to calling it insurrection makes it that much more difficult, which is great. So, to continue with the piece here while we have a few minutes before the music. So, if we're going to follow the Constitution, and I guess we might as well, right? Cawthorn can't serve, and if he can't serve, he's not allowed to run. In the papers documenting their claim, and they're linked here, the challengers are specific about which of Cawthorn's actions are disqualifying. It's actually a fairly well-written complaint, as I see it. I saw David Neer's quick review of what was going on, and there's a great thread that I can share with you perhaps after the break that gets into the mechanics of it. And he points out also, it's not a complaint per se. It is I don't know what it is. It's a petition essentially to the Board of Elections, which has the power to grant or deny ballot access. And I mean, it's a legal filing, but it's not a lawsuit against him or anything, and it's not a lawsuit against the Board of Elections yet either. It's simply a motion before them for them to exercise their powers. So anyway, in the papers documenting the claim, the challengers are specific about which of Cawthorn's actions are disqualifying. The plan by Trump allies, including, as we soon learned, numerous lawmakers, to have Vice President Mike Pence simply declare that the electoral votes of certain states should not be included was transparently illegal. The orchestration of a mass quote-unquote march, and it wasn't much of a march, it was only about a mile, with heavy extremist presence, was a plot to intimidate Congress into going along with the scheme. Either Madison Cawthorn or his staff were, according to published reports, in communication with the organizers of that rally and with Mark Meadows, then Trump's White House chief of staff. Now, there's more, and we'll go through it, but it's a terrific instrument and a great use of the forum that is afforded to them in North Carolina, and whether it works or not, at this point, hardly the point.
Hi, everyone. It's me, Gil. Minimal contributor to content, but regular contributor to funding for Kagro in the morning. Let's change things up from David's so very tired plea for your contributions with a plea of my own. If you want to add your voice to the show, do it. Record your own segment using your favorite recording device and send it to David. Read an article and give your opinion. Write your own essay and read that. The sky's the limit. Well, not really. Try to keep it relatively short so David doesn't have to stress about cutting it and hurting your feelings. Join the hallowed ranks of Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter and be part of this somewhat witty deep dive into political topics with unnecessary censoring. Lend your voice to the show by sending it to kagrox@gmail.com. KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We were in the middle of Hunter's run-through of the, I don't know what you would call it, the filing of a motion to disqualify Madison Cawthorn from the ballot in North Carolina on 14th Amendment grounds, which, again, usually a long shot and usually the sort of thing, well, I would suspect ordinarily the sort of thing that a local or, a congressional district level board of election might shy away from issuing a ruling on. This seems like a fairly sensitive constitutional issue, and the sort of thing that would be bound for the Supreme Court, and you know what would happen then. But it might be fun to just take a stand and say, I don't know, that's the way we read it. The thing's getting reviewed no matter what you do. So what the hell? Let's have some fun with it. And we'll read the Constitution word for word and say, yeah, I read in the paper that was an insurrection, so boom, you're done. See how it goes. And like I said, whether it succeeds or not, it does succeed in calling some serious attention because it was a well-written filing by all reports. It at the very least calls serious attention to and lays out a very detailed agenda for considering him to be an insurrectionist and traitor to the country. And if that's in circulation in his congressional district when he runs for re-election, that's always going to be a good thing. Well, for him anyway. It would be a terrible thing about other people about whom it might not be true. But as long as it's true, go for it. All right, so where were we with this? Yes. So it lays out some of the specifics, and let's see, I think Hunter will take us through some of them too. Cawthorn himself was vocal in the days before the violence in promoting the big lie, positing that the elections were stolen, quote-unquote stolen, by fraud. A flat lie has been proven in countless courtrooms before that point. And important there to stress on that. It had been proven in countless courtrooms before that point that he continued. He boosted the January 6th rally specifically, tweeting that, quote, the future of this republic hinges on the actions of a solitary few, which is kind of a odd construction all by itself. Solitary few. Solitary few. I mean, you can be solitary and someone else can be solitary somewhere else, and the two of you together are two solitary people, and I guess if you have several of them, you're a solitary few, but I don't know. I'd probably stay away from that construction. Anyway, but he also tweeted as well, it's time to fight. He loves to say things like that. He further goaded the January 6th crowd in person, not long before the violence erupted. That the scheme to bring an angry mob to the Capitol at precisely the time when Congress was meeting to validate the electors, specifically for the purpose of intimidating Congress into invalidating the election, was an assault on the legitimate transfer of power, is not in doubt. That fact. Long sentence, and I lost my way along the way, but you get it. None of those who helped organize and promote the event were shy in announcing that overturning the election was the explicit intent of the march, and that the crowd was meant to, quote, fight to make sure that happened. And then they showed up, and guess what they did? They punched people, like an actual fight. And, of course, Cawthorn did more. He returning to the Capitol, Cawthorn was one of the Republicans who voted to reject the electors of the key Biden-won states, despite both the violence and the utter falsity of each of Trump's already disproven hoax theories. There was no case for it. Even now, after a full year of boosting the hoax claims, Cawthorn and the others have been unable to come up with any rationale for rejecting those electors other than the same hoax claims. On the contrary, Cawthorn has spent the last year demanding that those arrested for violence inside the Capitol on that day be freed, and telling his supporters they, quote, all need to be storing up some ammunition, unquote, to respond if elections, quote, continue to be stolen. Take all this together, and it's clear that Madison Cawthorn took numerous hoax-premised actions specifically intended to nullify the election, overthrow the duly elected president, and put his party's preferred leader into that slot instead. He tried to overthrow the government, and the Constitution says, despite any malicious beliefs to the contrary, that you're not allowed to do that. Specifically, the January 6th plot was an insurrection that succeeded in momentarily obstructing government function in an attempt to overthrow that government, and the 14th Amendment, passed immediately after the Civil War, bars those who participate in an insurrection from federal office. And there's a whole mess of subsequent court decisions to define what insurrection means, winnowing it down to a very narrow meaning, and Cawthorn, along with at least several other House members, Republicans in particular, and he says Republicans, House Republicans, who provided concrete assistance to Trump's plan, seems to have landed himself within the boundaries of even that narrow, winnowed down version. So what happens now? And the answer for most of us has been, it's this ancient provision of this thing. We have no practice with it in the last century. So, it's just not something we know what to do with, and it seems arcane, and it's a nice fantasy, but we don't do that sort of thing anymore, or like electrocute our traders, for instance. Well, okay, let's be realists here, he continues. There's not a chance in hell that North Carolina's State Board of Elections is going to agree that the Republicans who helped aid and abet a violent attack on the federal government aren't allowed to run for office anymore. Such a decision would eliminate anywhere from a dozen to several hundred Republican candidates nationally. Not that North Carolina's decision would be broadly applicable, but or even maybe even to other Republicans in North Carolina. It could be specific just to Cawthorn, but it would be taken as precedent. Certainly, we understand that, and if it were broadly applied and fairly applied, it would eliminate anywhere from a dozen to several hundred Republican candidates nationally, which is okay. They have time to find new ones. The 14th Amendment either says it or it doesn't, means it or it doesn't. But okay, true. One of the arguments frequently employed against exercising provisions like this is, well, it would be difficult or embarrassing or a lot of people would be affected. Somehow that actually works. Unless it's abortion, in which case, screw you. Such a decision would eliminate anywhere from a dozen to several hundred Republican candidates nationally. It was the Republican Party that assisted in Trump's attempt at a propaganda-driven coup. He had assistance not only from individual Republican lawmakers, but also from the party apparatus itself. Whether Trump himself engaged in an insurrection is almost certainly a decision that will be hashed out in courtrooms in the near future. That decision will likely inform how we speak of the allies that assisted him. But the petition certainly spells out enough evidence that it can't just be summarily dismissed either. And the document explicitly asks that the challengers, quote, be authorized to depose Cawthorn, not in the way we like to think, but, a deposition as opposed to, yes, depose him like you would depose a king. I'm for that. Cawthorn, so they want to depose Cawthorn, and that they be authorized to issue subpoenas to Cawthorn and others for documents relevant to his actions. We look forward to questioning him under oath, Attorney Ron Fine noted to the Associated Press, and that is probably the catch they're most fishing for here. Not just State Board of Elections hearings on their challenge, but an opportunity to get Cawthorn on the record once and for all, either supporting or distancing himself from the plot to erase an election. If he sticks to his guns even under oath, it's solid evidence that he intended insurrection, according to the 14th Amendment's framework. If he doesn't, Donald Trump will be mad at him. Very, very mad. Fine says we can expect more challenges like this one, and he's assuredly right. While the press and the Department of Justice have both been extremely slow in acknowledging just how serious and multi-pronged the Republican attempt to nullify the presidential election truly was, there's little question that for the organizers of the January 6th rally and their numerous lawmaker allies, erasing a valid presidential election was the whole point. It was intended as a toppling of constitutional government. It's one that Republicans are still pursuing with new state-level laws designed to knock out the obstacles that stood in Trump's way the last time around. Cawthorn unquestionably attempted to topple our government, but he's still in government, in Congress, in fact, right now, because his fellow Republicans support those efforts themselves. And otherwise, you would think you could get to that two-thirds necessary to expel such a person. But unfortunately, half of the House is committed to supporting him and supporting that position and pretending that it wasn't something worthy of punishment. Now, I have a couple other treatments of the same material around. Let me see. What do I have? Okay. Here I've got a tweet thread from Mark Joseph Stern, staff writer at Slate, who covers the courts and the law in his telling of it. And this thread, I think, is a little more detailed about the mechanics and what's being alleged, with a few screen grabs from the filing. And I think the filing, as much fun as it would be to read through it top to bottom, I think, most legal filings, a little lengthy and not really great radio. But let's see what Mark Joseph Stern has for us here. A group of North Carolina voters have filed a lawsuit seeking to disqualify Madison Cawthorn from the 2022 ballot under the 14th Amendment, arguing that he supported an insurrection or rebellion by allegedly facilitating the attack on the Capitol. One of the pull quotes here from the filing, paragraph 90, if you want some idea of how long it would take to read through this whole thing. Challengers have a reasonable suspicion that Representative Cawthorn was involved in planning efforts to intimidate Congress and the Vice President into rejecting valid electoral votes and subvert the essential constitutional function of an orderly and peaceful transition of power. Challengers have reasonable suspicion that Cawthorn was involved in either planning the attack on January 6th or, alternatively, the planning of the pre-attack demonstration and or march on the Capitol with the advanced knowledge that it was substantially likely to lead to the attack, and otherwise voluntarily aided the insurrection after taking an oath as a member of Congress to support the Constitution, disqualifying him from federal office under the disqualification clause of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and therefore that he, quote, does not meet the constitutional qualifications for the office he seeks, with a citation there for that language to the North Carolina General Statutes, sections 163 to section 163-127.2b. They have a whole thing here. There's a provision of North Carolina law that backs up the idea that if you don't meet the constitutional qualifications for office, you have to be booted from the ballot. You can't be allowed on in the first place. Stern continues, the 14th Amendment bars anyone who engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the U.S. from holding a seat in Congress. The voters challenging Cawthorn's candidacy are represented by, among others, a former Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court. How do you like that? James G. Exum. So that has to carry some weight, although, surely there are former Chief Justices of other state Supreme Courts that we would think of as Republican jokers as well, but I don't know. Maybe the guy's Republican. I actually don't know anything about him. But the title will get you to sit up and take notice, at least for a moment. The challengers to Cawthorn's candidacy cite an opinion by then-Judge Neil Gorsuch, that is to say, not yet Justice, but then federal judge Neil Gorsuch, holding, and Gorsuch, he's gone on to, to bigger things since then. He's holds an important seat somewhere in the judiciary. But in his prior ruling, he held that if a candidate is ineligible for federal office, a state may prevent him from appearing on the ballot in the first place. How do you like that? The section coming from, let's see, which one are we talking about? Hassan versus Colorado, unless it's Hassan, but Hassan versus Colorado. And here's the excerpt, the screen grab, and then the last part of it is highlighted. So that's the important part. I'm going to read you the unimportant part to set it up. Whatever it is, Gorsuch, I guess, joins in this opinion. We affirm, we discern no reasonable error. This would have been, that is, we affirm means the lower court ruling. He's ruling from a circuit court of appeals here. We discern no reversible error in the magistrate judge's deposition and see little we might usefully add to the extensive and thoughtful opinion he issued. To be sure, Mr. Hassan contends the magistrate judge overlooked one aspect of his claim. He insists his challenge to Colorado's enforcement of the natural-born citizen requirement did not depend exclusively on invalidation of Article 2 by the 14th Amendment. Even if Article 2 properly holds him ineligible to assume the office of president, that's the natural-born citizen part, in case you were wondering, what, Colorado has a natural-born citizen requirement for running for Congress? That's not right. That's unconstitutional. No, I guess he was running for president and wanted to be on the ballot in Colorado, and Colorado said no. So even if Article 2 properly holds him ineligible to assume the office of president, though, Hassan claims it was still an unlawful act of discrimination for the state to deny him a place on the ballot. He wasn't going to win, right? Put me on the ballot. Let me get a couple of votes. Well, Colorado said if you're not eligible to win and hold the office, then we're allowed to not even bother putting you on the ballot. He says, you got to put me on, and if I win, you can let the courts rule on my eligibility after that. But Neil Gorsuch says no. As the magistrate judge's opinion makes clear, we expressly reaffirm here, a state's legitimate interest in protecting the integrity and practical function of the political process permits it to exclude from the ballot candidates who are constitutionally prohibited from assuming office. See also generally Monroe versus the Socialist Workers' Party and Bullock versus Carter, the two citations here for that opinion. So, okay, that seems pretty good too. Add that to the pile. Odds that this lawsuit succeeds, very low. The 14th Amendment suggests that Congress, not the federal courts, are responsible for enforcing the 14th Amendment's disqualification clause. Odds that the litigation will nonetheless be fascinating, pretty high, in my opinion. Okay. I say suggests because the text of the 14th Amendment is not especially clear on this question. There are, though, a lot of other hurdles as well, including standing, one of the favorites, say, of the Supreme Court. We're getting rid of cases that they don't want to deal with. All right. Well, let's see. Here, Mark Joseph Stern includes the tweet of Lori Schoenberg, who says, well, yes, this is the question here. The 14th Amendment, Section 3, specifies that Congress can remove the disability imposed under the amendment's language with a two-thirds vote. That is to say, if you are somehow found, by what mechanism I don't know, but I'm sure there's some precedent because they have done this before, post-Civil War. If you're found to be an insurrectionist and find yourself disqualified, Congress can, by a two-thirds vote, do the opposite. Instead of two-thirds vote throwing you out, a two-thirds vote to clear you of the disqualification of being an insurrectionist is possible under the 14th Amendment. So Congress, with a two-thirds vote, can remove the disability, but does not specify the body that can impose the disability in the first instance. However, the standing issue remains. So, yeah, interesting. And a nice rundown, relatively quick, from Mark Joseph Stern here. So appreciate it. And this is the one that I think had the most relevant parts of the complaint pulled out and available for us to view. So, okay, very good. Thanks for that information. I just thought that was kind of a fun addition to the show. Meanwhile, yesterday, a lot of time spent yesterday on reading of this article in Politico, and a lot of the discussion online about it, the takeaway was, oh my God, there were states that actually sent fake certificates or electoral college voting certification. You know, they sent fake electoral votes to the Congress as part of an attempt to screw things up in Congress on January 6th. And that was surprising because I said, yeah, I know. I mean, I remember that happened. And then there was a second round of discussion in which everybody came around and said, oh, come on, that's old news. Rachel Maddow told us this like a couple of weeks ago in late December of last year. Oh, yeah, well, okay. But I missed that news. Okay, and again, I'm like, but I don't understand. They said that they were doing that. Republicans held press conferences to announce that they were doing that in December and January, December of 2020 and January 21, just before January 6th. It was in the news contemporaneously. Never mind that Rachel Maddow also reported on it a year later. Nothing wrong with her reporting on it a year later. Remind everybody every day, because everybody seems to have forgotten. I don't know why people would have missed this. I don't know how they could have. I don't know why they forgot it. But, by the way, and I also don't know why nobody seems to have been arrested in this. This really baffles me. I mean, they forged paperwork, to Congress for a kind of an important function about the Electoral College. Like, what do you have to forge in this country to get yourself arrested? Like, it seems to me like that's one of the most important documents that there could possibly be. And if you forge that, you'd probably be in a whole lot of trouble, you would think. But maybe they don't. Maybe they can't find the people who did it. Except they signed it. They signed their names to it, And, like, we know who they are. We even know who are the people who attested to their signatures. There's, like, a notary signature on there. And so who mailed it. All of this stuff is kind of important. And to the extent, since we've just been discussing the last couple of weeks, the importance of several courts finding that participating in the riot at a certain level anyway, constituted the obstruction of an official proceeding of Congress, and that carried potentially a 20-year sentence. Like, how is this any less obstruction of an official proceeding to intentionally send them false electoral college documents? I guess they could claim, well, my plot was foiled, the National Archives and all the other people who received them. I don't know who they sent them to, but at least the National Archives is on record as having received them or saying they rejected them. I don't know whether they put return to sender and sent them back. Wouldn't that be something? They sent them back and they're like, oh shoot, there goes the evidence. Now that's why we haven't arrested anybody. But I mean, there's contemporaneous news articles of people admitting that they're doing this. Can't we use that? Anyway, and did they scan them? Did they take a picture? Anything? I don't know. Anyway, you would think you could get arrested for this stuff, but I don't know why they haven't done it. And it's certainly as much obstruction as anything else. They clearly intended to foul the proceedings this way. And you remember the story, right? They were just going, it was part of their claim that the election in these states had been stolen and the electoral votes didn't legitimately belong to Biden. So the people who were in some cases, people who were supposed to have been, they would have been the electors had Trump won that state. They were candidates, the Republican nominated candidates for electors for that state. In some cases, those guys met and said, to hell with it, we're going to send the document, which I think is maybe I can't decide which is the worst violation. But at any rate, then in other states, they were like, I don't know even who the Republican electors are, but I'm a Republican and I don't like Joe Biden. I'll just declare myself an elector and I'll sign this thing and we'll send it. And in some states, there were even two of such things. The Republican electors did one, and then a bunch of other Republicans did one. And I don't know, none of them seem to have gotten arrested. And I'm sure, people in the Justice Department, well, be patient, et cetera, et cetera. But what else do you really need? I mean, I know they're trying to build a whole case that has to do with a conspiracy to obstruct, but I mean, this one is a self-contained unit. And by the way, actually, about something else, addressing some other issue today. Maybe we'll dig that up and take a look today. I did see Marcy Wheeler writing on something today in which she mentions in passing that Trump's phone call to Raffensperger is probably illegal in itself, a self-contained unit. And like last week, there was a big to-do between her and I think it was kind of indirect. I don't know if they actually engaged one another, but others were fighting around them between Brian Beutler and Marcy about why are we trying to, we keep saying Marcy is a big fan of everybody. Hold on, slow down. You don't really know what the DOJ is doing in every instance. And in some cases, they've left a pretty significant paper trail that would appear to indicate that they are, in fact, methodically building a case in this way. But as impatient as you are about these things, and I understand that, you got to wait for the case to develop before you pass judgment on Merrick Garland. And it's very unsatisfactory to a lot of people. But Brian, it seemed to me, was saying in particular, why no charge for Trump in his call to Raffensperger? The record is complete. We have the recording, and there's nothing about the arrest of the people who actually broke into the Capitol that bears on a charge for calling Brad Raffensperger and saying the things he said. And she pushes back, and they fight back and forth and through proxies and everything. But I ultimately was thinking, actually, that's correct. I think Brian has it right. As much as the case, and as interesting as the case is for going slow with the rioters and insurrectionists who broke in and trying to meticulously prove that some of the worst offenders there were involved in obstruction cases, there's nothing that's necessary from those obstruction cases for charging Trump directly for his call to Raffensperger. It just doesn't require it. In fact, Trump's call to Raffensperger is an independent act of obstruction and should be charged as such, and there were no street thug accomplices to that call. There are people who built on that call or who did what they did because they knew or suspected that actions being taken at that point behind the scenes by Trump would work in coordination with their plan. but it didn't depend on that. And I think Marcy actually acknowledged that today, but not by saying, oh yeah, Brian was right, but by saying, other thing. Anyway, so I don't know exactly what's going on and what it was that makes. Sometimes you miss an important detail. That happens all the time. But I guess a lot of people missed the important detail that they were sending forged Electoral College documents to Congress and to the National Archives, which is a pretty serious thing. Anyway, this comes under this headline, which we'll tease you with and read a little bit of before we head out on break, and then we'll perhaps resume it just to see what else was happening in this Politico article. January 6th panel ramps up investigation into Trump's state-level pressure. Politico has identified the information the committee has received from key swing states as lawmakers prepare to take their findings public. And I guess that's kind of what they're doing now, but just informally. They're taking it public via Politico. The public focus on Congress's January 6th investigation so far is what happened in Washington, D.C. Behind the scenes, the probe's state-level work is kicking into overdrive, writes Nicholas Wu for Politico. The House Committee investigating the Capitol attack has gathered thousands of records from state officials and interviewed a slate of witnesses as it attempts to retrace former President Donald Trump's attempts to subvert the 2020 election, particularly in 4 key states that swung the presidency to Joe Biden. They're getting ready to take their work public, possibly as soon as the spring. Oh boy, can't wait. Or literally, we cannot wait. We want to let the public see and hear from these individuals who conducted the elections in those states. Select Panel Chair Benny Thompson of Mississippi said in an interview, he described those witnesses as particularly important given their mandates to keep elections fair and impartial, and he throws that in quotes, while hailing from one political party. The voluminous documents state elections officials have sent the January 6th committee, obtained by Politico through open records requests, underscore the depth of Trump's pressure campaign directed at the typically lower-level administrators of presidential balloting. The emails, texts, and phone recordings, there we're talking about Raffensperger, I'm sure, also add consequential context to previously reported incidents, such as Trump's call to Georgia's top elections investigator and Mark Meadows' call to Georgia's election officials, a separate call, not just the one he participated in with Trump. Well, we'll dive further into it and see what is new that might have sparked a new round of discovery of these things after this short break. Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. We're here on Netroots Radio as always, and continuing with the Politico article that had many people on Twitter talking yesterday about the forged Electoral College certificates. And, it's a major undertaking to do something like that. They're pretty official documents, very important, but, they're meant to, I guess, in their original design, I guess, they're very fancied up and they involve a lot of signatures and a lot of copies being sent. And I guess it's something of an anti-forgery, anti-theft formula that they're using here. I guess the early 18th century version of anti-forgery and anti-theft, depending very largely on signatures, which was never really a super reliable way. And it makes it easy to forge, especially a lot easier to forge if nobody's going to get prosecuted for it. I mean, I guess you could forge it in 10 minutes. Why spend any time trying to get it right? But anyway, where we left off was, Politico had gotten a number of committee records through open records requests. By the way, that's something that the committee, if they weren't interested in leaking the information, they could contest. They could fight in court over whether or not the open records rules apply to those particular documents, if they needed to keep them confidential for the time being in order, not to undermine an ongoing investigation or something like that. But apparently they were pretty eager. They got an open records request and they said, okay, yeah, here's the records. So it's a leak without being a leak. It wasn't like you were unauthorized to give that information out. We might have been unauthorized to just pass out copies of it to people, but if they go through with the paperwork and make an open records request, they've got a legal claim to it, and we acknowledge that claim, and there you go. That's a leak without being a leak. The select panel asked states for any scrap of evidence to justify allegations of election fraud that Trump baselessly promoted, focusing much of its efforts on officials in Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. Those states found virtually no evidence of fraud, according to Thompson. Among the officials who spoke with the committee was Kathy Boockvar, Pennsylvania's Secretary of State during the 2020 election, according to a source familiar with the situation not authorized to speak publicly. A spokesperson for the Pennsylvania Secretary of State declined to comment on whether the panel had been in touch with the state's officials. Mainly, the records show state officials trying to either mollify or ignore Trump and his allies without distorting election results or embracing debunked claims of vote tampering. A spokesperson for the select panel declined to comment on the documents. First section here is pressure in Georgia. We know the most about that one because of the phone call, I think. Just one day before Georgia was set to certify the 2020 election results and seal Trump's defeat, records turned over to the January 6th committee show a text message that arrived on the phone of Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. And it reads, "Mr. Secretary, Mark Meadows here. If you could give me a brief call at your convenience. Thank you." An incomplete sentence, but okay. That, of course, from the then White House Chief of Staff, texted to Raffensperger on November 19th, 2020. Obtained through a public records request as well, although it's not clear whether, I guess they got their copy from the committee from whom they made an open records request, not an open records request for Mark Meadows' phone records. That's not open. Anyway, it doesn't appear that Raffensperger, a Republican, responded to Meadows. His office sent no reply to one Meadows text because aides weren't sure if it was real, according to CNN. But it was not the last time Raffensperger would hear from Trump's allies as they sought to pressure state-level officials to overturn the president's loss. By the way, that's linked there, and I'm semi-curious about what the story says if they weren't sure it was real. There's always that suspicion, but from that message, if you got the other one, Mr. Secretary, well, if you got it, you'd be like, why? I'm not the secretary. Why is Mark Meadows texting me? But if you were the secretary and you got a text that said, Mark Meadows here, if you could give me a brief call at your convenience, you could say, well, no harm done in calling the White House and saying, I'm calling for Mark Meadows. I'm Brad Raffensperger, Secretary of State for Georgia. I believe he texted me asking me to call him, and if that's the case, could you please put me through to him? And he could always either have somebody else pick up the phone or pick it up himself and say, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I think you've been hoaxed. But, I have a feeling that maybe another text made them think it could possibly be fake, and I bet it said something outrageous, and they said, well, this can't possibly be true, and I'm curious about whether we know anything about that. What would you have to say in a text to make Raffensperger think this isn't real? This from a December 2nd, 2021 piece in CNN. New details shed light on the ways Mark Meadows pushed federal agencies to pursue dubious elections claims. So it's not exclusively about this text, but I'm curious to see if I can skim this and see a mention of Raffensperger. And I don't know how quickly that's going to go. So I'll jump back to that, but that's something we might want to explore at some point. Meadows in Georgia. Maybe it's down here. Let's see. Paid an unexpected visit. Did you remember this? I think we did mention this. On December 22nd, 2020, Meadows paid an unexpected visit to a Cobb County facility where investigators were running a signature match audit of absentee ballot envelopes. Georgia's Deputy Secretary of State, Jordan Fuchs, intercepted Meadows, explaining he wasn't allowed in the audit room. Fun fact, technically the chiefs of staff, me and Mark Meadows, are not allowed into the room, Fuchs told Atlanta's WSB-TV at the time. He just asked basic process questions, wanted to know exactly what we were verifying, are we checking signatures from multiple different files, and that what we have is accurate. Interesting. Then Trump grows increasingly irritated with Georgia officials. They reached out repeatedly to Raffensperger's office. At one point, Meadows texted Raffensperger from a Gmail account. The message that was largely disregarded, a person familiar with the situation said at the time, staffers were unsure if the message was real, as they were getting inundated with calls and emails from people angry about the election results. So they thought maybe somebody was faking it. I guess because it came from a Gmail account, they thought that it might be fake. So it wasn't necessarily the content of it, but that's not reprinted here. So I guess we'll just never know. Although it's entirely possible that the content itself was also so offensive and outrageous that it couldn't possibly be real. But anyway, okay, we'll jump back to the Politico piece here, which set off the mini firestorm yesterday about forged electoral certificates. A spokesperson for Georgia's Secretary of State didn't respond to any requests for comment. Meadows texted Raffensperger a second time on the morning of December 5th, 2020, asking him to call the White House switchboard to set up a call. Your voicemail is full, Meadows told Raffensperger. Raffensperger has already interviewed with the panel, according to Thompson, who praised him as very straightforward in his testimony. A previously unreported email from one of Raffensperger's top aides, Jordan Fuchs, was also turned over to the committee. In it, Fuchs responded to Meadows' December 22nd trip to Georgia's Cobb County. There we are. We just read about it. During the state's signature match audit. She emailed, Jordan is a she. I did not know that. Jordan emailed Meadows to clarify a few items about the rejection rate of absentee ballots, something Trump and his allies had alleged was much lower than normal. Fuchs' note included the text of a press release sent out by the Secretary of State's office a month beforehand with a more thorough explanation of how the office evaluated absentee ballots. Meadows' attorney didn't respond to any request for comment. Also included in the document dump are emails between Senator Lindsey Graham and Raffensperger's office. Let's not forget about that, since he's still mouthing off about this stuff, which shows how a previously reported call between the two officials came about roughly 2 weeks after the 2020 election. Hope you're doing well. Senator Graham has requested a call with Secretary Raffensperger at his earliest convenience, a Graham staffer told two of Raffensperger's top aides on November 12th, 2020. The call between the two men ended with Graham indicating to Raffensperger some ballots should be tossed out, the Georgia official said later. Graham's office declined to comment. The state also turned over a previously reported audio recording of a December 23rd, 2020 call between Trump and Francis Watson, the chief investigator in the Georgia's Secretary of State's office, and a brief call between Watson and an unidentified staffer. In the December 23rd call, Trump had urged Watson to find, quote, dishonesty in the state's election results. I just found it. It's right here. Your call, sir. What is he doing calling somebody? I mean, it would be remarkable for him to reach out and call the Georgia Secretary of State, but to call staffers, individual staffers in the Secretary of State's office is ridiculous. Forged election documents in Michigan and Arizona, our next segment. This is the one that set off the firestorm. As Trump's team pushed its discredited voter fraud narrative, the National Archives received forged certificates. I mean, say it again, right? I mean, maybe it wasn't said quite so forcefully back then. Certainly the results or the press releases from the people sending them, they didn't say we're sending forged ones. And so I guess it didn't raise eyebrows the same way. It just was like, these are pathetic people doing anything they can to cling to the hope that they won this election that they didn't, and didn't strike anybody at the time except us, that they're forging these. We should do something about this. Now we're saying forged, and so, okay. As Trump's team pushed its discredited voter fraud narrative, the National Archives received forged certificates of ascertainment, declaring him, and then Vice President Mike Pence, the winners of both Michigan and Arizona and their electors after the 2020 election. Now, I had somebody say to me earlier today that Wisconsin belonged in this story too, and that they had someone had sent a similarly forged document. But all that's being alleged here is that it's Michigan and Arizona's which reach the archives. It could very well be the case that the other forgers didn't send them. Maybe they had second thoughts. They may have sent them incorrectly. They may only have sent them to Congress, not knowing that you're supposed to send, a legitimate certificate would have been copied and sent to the archives several times over, would have been sent to the federal district judge in which the Electoral College had met, and several other repositories along the way. Maybe they just forgot, but whatever. The only ones mentioned here as reaching the National Archives, anyway, are from Michigan and Arizona. Public record requests show the secretaries of state for those states, Michigan and Arizona, sent those certificates to the January 6th panel, along with correspondence between the National Archives and the state officials about the documents. So that's interesting. So I guess it doesn't say, but the archives must have contacted the secretaries of state of Michigan and Arizona and said, somebody's sending falsified documents from your state purporting to be your Electoral College certificates of ascertainment. I mean, I think you may know that already, but do you want them back or a copy of them for legal purposes? And I guess they said yes. We'd have to see what the correspondence reads. Spokespeople for the Michigan and Arizona Secretaries of State declined to comment. The offices confirmed that Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson and Arizona Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, both Democrats, and their staff met with the panel, the January 6th committee, in November. They mostly discussed election administration in Arizona, the 2020 elections, threats and harassment directed toward the office, and, of course, the Cyber Ninjas partisan ballot review, said Hobbs' spokesperson C. Murphy Hebert. Or Hebert, perhaps, if she's Cajun, Hebert. Benson and her staff took questions from the committee on the 2020 election and events leading up to the January 6th riot, according to Tracy Wimmer, a spokesperson for Benson. Neither of them mention discussion of the forgeries, which is amazing. The National Archives sent emails to the Arizona Secretary of State on December 11th, 2020, passing along the forged certificates, quote, for your awareness, and informing the state officials the archives would not accept them. But what happened to them? Arizona then took legal action against at least one of the groups, there we are, who sent in the fake documents, but there should be a federal charge too, sending a cease and desist letter, wow, to the pro-Trump Sovereign Citizen group, telling them to stop using the state seal and referring the matter to the state attorney general. Or, come on, there needs to be more to it than that. I mean, and you don't even necessarily need federal charges, although I think it's a good idea just to guarantee that something happens here. But a cease and desist letter? Now, listen here, you sent a fake Electoral College certificate of ascertainment to the National Archives at a very serious offense. Don't do it again. This is a cease and desist letter. Listen, I'm warning you, that seal is copyrighted. That's apparently the most serious legal charge they can bring to bear on this. And I must insist that you cease and desist from using our copyrighted material in your forgeries. They're forgeries. Arrest them for forgery, guys. Come on. Anyway, we'll see what comes of it. I mean, the wheels of justice turn slowly, but in a year, if you can't get yourself arrested for forging a certificate of ascertainment for the Electoral College, I just don't think it's going to happen. By affixing the state seal to documents containing false and misleading information about the results of Arizona's November 3rd, 2020 general election, you undermine the confidence in our democratic institutions, Hobbs wrote to one of the pro-Trump groups. I know, we're trying to do that. Thank you very much. We were thinking you were going to prosecute us. Now, that's not Hobbs' purview, the prosecution. But you could certainly let them know that you're pressing for it, if you were. Anyway, that group's leader, this is a Sovereign Citizens gang, did this one in Arizona. Anyway, that group's leader, Lori Osecki, I'm guessing a pronunciation, Osiecki, had told the Arizona Republic in December of 2020 that she decided to send in the certificates after taking part in post-election rallies and after attending a day-long meeting in Phoenix that had included Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. Right. Okay. I mean, I think I read that report or something quite like it contemporaneously. They were admitting that they were doing this stuff. The group that forged the Michigan certification had not used the state seal, and it appears state officials there took no further action after the archives rejected it. And there too, I mean, that I guess is crying out for a federal charge. If the state can't bring a charge because they didn't use their seal, I mean, there's no state forgery laws, though. Of course there are. I mean, I just don't understand. It's sort of like there's this weird principle. I guess, we run into this all the time in other contexts where, if you kill somebody, you're in trouble. You'll be put on trial for murder. If you somehow rig it, through the body of the state and kill millions of people, but pretend it's a war, there's no prosecution available to you. And sometimes, you scale these things up, but sometimes it's just the audacity. It's not even the scale of the event that gets people off the hook here somehow. I feel like we run into that all the time in constitutional law and political activity, etc. There's just something about it happening or when there are elected officials involved in something, even if it's something pedestrian, something that's just plain old, sex crimes that members of Congress are implicated in. And there's this sort of aspect to it that it's unbelievable that a person of such stature would engage in such activity. Now it's no longer unbelievable, but now we just don't care anymore. It's just too common. I don't know. But there was always questions. Well, will they charge them? I mean, this is a very influential person. It's very difficult to believe that someone so prominent and influential would be on trial for such a heinous crime. So we just won't. But here, I mean, I guess it's certainly not a violent crime, but I mean, I don't know what to tell you. It's the basic thing that we have problem with every time on these things. If you don't punish it, why would anybody think that it wasn't okay to do next? Like, why not try again? Well, it didn't work this time, but next time I'll put the seal on it. I forgot. Oh, right, the seal. That would have made it look better. Thanks for the tip, Arizona. You didn't get prosecuted either, right? So cool. Let's try it. I mean, I guess there was some proceeding of some kind, but who knows? And it ends in a cease and desist letter. Come on. So, I mean, I would try it. And as I suggested on Twitter yesterday, maybe here's the answer, right? If you agree with me and you think that these people should be arrested and prosecuted, I say you go arrest them. I'll write you a warrant. Apparently that's okay. I'll just write, I don't know what they look like. I'll probably put arrest warrant at the top and presumably whereas that guy's a total a-hole and totally broke the law, and I know it, you know it, and the American people know it. Bob Dole, right? I don't know. I'll just write it out, and I'll sign it. And what? At worst, I'll get a cease and desist letter. Please, please, please don't use our seal on your fake arrest warrants. And look, I know you're a sensible person. You're like, that's funny, but I'm not going to go arrest this guy just because I have a handwritten warrant made up by me. Of course, you wouldn't say it that way. You would say made up by David. And I would say to you, sure, that's fine. But what do you want? Some proof that you're constitutionally allowed to do this? Because the sovereign citizens certainly think so, too. Well, as it happens, I have your answer. I will write you a constitution that says that you have the ability to do that. And I'll even put a seal on it. Worst thing can happen is I get my second or third cease and desist letter, I think. I don't know. Apparently this is okay now. Just make up your own legal documents. Use them for whatever you want. If they work, great. If they don't work, well, what the hell? We'll do better next time. That is kind of like unbelievable to me that that's not taken more seriously and that more people aren't clamoring for arrests on this thing. And again, how long does it take to build the case? They signed the documents. The end. I know who they are. It's not an anonymous threat letter that you can't find out who sent it. It's addressed and I don't know. I mean, by the way, if the National Archives returned it, where did they return it to? Was there a return address? You're telling me it was signed and had a return address on it, and a year later, the best you can do is a cease and desist letter? Where'd you deliver the cease and desist letter? I think I could probably fill out the warrant for this thing at this point. I even have an address for you to make a search at. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, I guess For all of you who are, say, upset with the pace of things and what's Merrick Garland doing and why is Marcy Wheeler saying that everything has to be so careful and meticulously build the case and investigate every angle and all this stuff, that all makes sense. I understand that. This one is going to undermine your confidence, though, I think, in the ability of the federal or state governments to properly prosecute people. If you can't make this case, I don't know what we're going to do with you. All right. Let's see. I'm going to open up a couple of the other things here. I want to discover what they were and try and get some of the smaller items out of the way, or tease you with bigger items before we take our break and get ready to talk to Joan in our 6-day countdown to whatever the hell it is that Chuck Schumer has in mind. Even though, all indications are that on or about the 17th, well, it's not going to be the 17th. That's a holiday. I assume they're not going to meet. Or maybe they'll, make a big show of doing it for the 17th. I don't know. But anyway, they'll get together, and it looks like, for all the world, like they don't have a plan here. That we've got no word from Manchin or Sinema that they were willing to go along with it. Though there was an opening last week about the possibility of, what did they say? I forget what possibility he was throwing out there. But maybe of small bore change. Ah, yes, right, like getting rid of debate on the motions to proceed, et cetera, like that. That doesn't seem like the sort of thing that Schumer has in mind for celebrating on the 17th. So I think what we're looking at is a week-long countdown to having a show vote of it and having Manchin and Sinema defect, and it doesn't carry, but then they have a press conference and say, we tried, and these are the guys who stood in our way. But it should be noted, I'm sure they'll say, Republicans are the worst. And I don't know, maybe Joan has some idea about what else might happen. Anyway, let's see. I'll open up these various other items. This is the one about Nancy Mace getting COVID for the second time. So definitely had that one here. Let's see. Other things worth noting. Yes, right. Just to reiterate the point about Madison Cawthorn, I saw Kylie Joy Gray, our good friend on Twitter, tweeting out that this complaint to keep Cawthorn off the ballot is brilliant in many ways, including the spot it puts him in. The article made this point, but I'll just reiterate it since I saw her make it first. He doubles down on the insurrection. If he doubles down on the insurrection and disqualifies himself, that's good enough. If he goes the other direction, tries to save himself on the ballot and disavows it, he loses Trump's support. And maybe even gets primaried, although I, shudder to think what could happen in a primary between Madison Cawthorn and someone primarying him from the right. But okay. And speaking of what the hell happened to charges here, I guess for the record we'll add on the Raffensperger call, which I still believe could be an independent charge, of several independent charges against Trump, including one, I think, on the obstruction statute, or at least I think they should investigate the possibility of that. And we're wondering, well, what the hell's going on with that? Well, we're waiting for Merrick Garland to do something. That may or may not happen, but this AP News report, I believe from yesterday, notes, at least for the record, where's the date on this thing? There it is. It doesn't have a date. It actually says yesterday on it. So, okay. That makes me think it's forged. But anyway, Georgia DA investigating Trump closer to decision on charges. So that seems like good news. The prosecutor weighing whether Donald Trump and others committed crimes by trying to pressure Georgia officials to overturn Joe Biden's presidential election victory said a decision on whether to bring charges could come as early as the first half of this year. I know, so super satisfying. That's spring, just like the January 6th committee says. So no relief in terms of getting an answer faster. But maybe that just means they're doing a thorough job also. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, F-A-N-I, Fani Willis, I hope I've got the pronunciation close to correct, said in an interview with the Associated Press last week that her team is making solid progress and she's leaning toward asking for a special grand jury with subpoena power to investigate or to aid the investigation. I believe in 2022 a decision will be made in the case. Gee whiz, thanks. It's January 11th. Think you can fit it in this year? I certainly think that in the first half of the year that decisions will be made. This is not super committal stuff, but okay, it's on the record. Why isn't anybody doing anything? I'm doing something. Why isn't anybody doing anything faster? Well, I don't know. I'll get back to you next week about why we're not doing things faster. Anyway, okay, I believe in 2022 a decision will be made. Certainly in the first half of the year could be a decision of some sort being made. But Willis told the AP that she hasn't imposed deadlines on her staff and has urged them to be thorough in their examinations. She's assembled a team of fewer than 10 people. That doesn't tell us too much. Lawyers, investigators, and a legal assistant who are focused primarily on this case and can consult outside lawyers with particular expertise in certain areas of law, she said. We're going to just get the facts, get the law, be very methodical, very patient, and in some extent unemotional about this quest for justice. Well, okay. I mean, that's the way you want to handle it as investigators, but a little faster. I mean, he's recorded. Willis declined to speak about the specifics, but she confirmed that the investigation scope includes, but is not limited to, the phone call, right? And a November 2020 phone call between Lindsey Graham and Raffensperger. Then the abrupt resignation of U.S. Attorney for Atlanta on January 4th, and comments made during the December 2020 Georgia Legislative Committee hearings on the election. So, a little broader than just that one call. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you.
Yeah, it's a little fuzzy.
Okay, well, we're back on the air, but yeah, it does seem a little fuzzy. Well, both, definitionally fuzzy and also... yeah, but I think the sound quality is okay. That's an interesting thing. I guess apparently Skype thinks I'm unavailable, and yet the call went through. And so we just
Skype thinks you're unavailable, but you are, hazy out there. You're fuzzy out there. So
yeah, all right. Well,
maybe Skype is right.
Skype is listening to the show and says you can't call him. He's doing a show. Oh, I see. Okay, you need to be the guest on the show. That will work. The other possibility we suggested is that it's a very intuitive program and it thinks I'm emotionally unavailable and yet on the phone. And I object to the characterization, and I think it's unfair. And anyway, really, you are, not me. So there.
Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing? You ready for the week ahead? I don't know whether there's going to be a great deal of actual discussion among the players this week or in the press this week, but I'm counting down. We're on 6 days to Chuck Schumer's self-imposed filibuster or bust deadline. But I haven't seen anything in the last couple of days that make me think that it's anything but the bust part. So I'm not sure whether anybody's really concentrating on this thing. Is that a worthy topic of discussion for today or no?
Well, it has to be because it's the main thing happening in the Senate right now. Well, Biden is going to Atlanta today. He's going to do a major speech saying, yes, we have to get rid of the filibuster. Yes, voting rights is the most important thing ever. And Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are expected to say, meh.
Yeah. No, it isn't. Not true. Well, maybe they're unavailable. How about that? At any rate, the fact that they have a whole program on, and again, I liked the idea originally of linking it to the idea of the celebration of Martin Luther King Day. Obviously, voting rights going to be top of mind for a lot of people, and so it makes some sense and has to happen sooner or
and the
later.
Combination with January 6th. And
yes, that too. Right, you're right.
Although I don't know if Nancy Pelosi's idea of musical theater was necessarily the best way to convince them.
All right, that was very West Wing-ish, maybe. I guess I think the Venn diagram of people who thought that was great idea, along with people who were like, yeah, we can just West Wing our way through a lot of these problems, with witty dialogue and pointing to the intractable logic of things. And we'll embarrass Republicans into doing the right thing. Or recalcitrant Democrats, for that matter. But, not a big...
Now, that might be one thing that could appeal to Kyrsten Sinema. Supposedly she has...
Maybe she likes it.
So wait for it, on her phone. She has one of the Hamilton songs as her ringtone. So, you don't have the votes.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Oh, that I think she's just...
Because of course she does.
Yeah. There I believe she's just trolling. Her point is, you don't have the votes, and I know because I'm one of them that you don't have.
Right.
So, all right. That's fantastic. But okay. That was one of the weak points of the January 6th argument, if there was one to be had during the memorial observances. But okay. I didn't see it. Fine, whatever.
It was a little weird. I mean, yes. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
There were other parts of it that were compelling. The member testimonials.
I can believe that.
The remembrance of this happened in America.
Yeah.
Because a president told violent rioters to go try to kill people.
Yeah. That's against the usual rules and procedures, but they're all spoken word testimonies. None of them
that guy can come back.
Yeah.
And win again.
Technically,
in 2 years.
It's still available to
if
him, I guess.
we don't do something to stop that.
Yes. So. And not just one thing. We should do everything you can and take every opportunity to put roadblocks in the way of that, and one of which is, if everybody gets to vote, we saw what happened in 2020. If enough people actually get the right to vote that they're entitled to and can exercise it, then he'll lose, which is a fine way, and usually the first line of defense you want when you're talking about a normal person and a normal candidate. You don't need any more. We'll just have the contest, and if you lose it, good. But they're doing everything they can, of course, to rig the procedure for doing that, and to make sure that people don't get their chance to vote. Even people who are eligible to vote, but who want to vote by a certain method of delivering the ballot. We'll rule it out of order to use this method to deliver your ballot. Never mind that we have, by the way, still have a lot of work to do in making it against the rules to deliver forged Electoral College certificates of ascertainment during, by certain methods. That we can't get anybody on. But, the rest of you, we'll be investigating your right to vote. But that drives me up the wall. I can't believe that.
We're back to where we've been from the very beginning, and it's just so frustrating. I mean, I really do think that at this point, Schumer and Biden are trying very hard. I mean, it's sort of a year too late. Manchin and Sinema.
Yes.
Schumer today is bringing in authors, historians of how democracies die to talk to the caucus luncheon, and, are Manchin and Sinema even going to bother to show up?
Oh, I don't know.
Doubtless.
Don't know whether they usually go. They might be upset that there's free food and they can't get it because they'll have to listen to garbage. But,
Manchin's argument has evolved a little bit. I mean, he keeps saying, well, yes, absolutely, we have to secure the vote and blah, 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 and it's so important in democracy, but the only way we can do it is with 10 good Republicans.
Yeah.
He says now he's willing to change filibuster rules, but he's only willing to do it with a, here we go again, 3/5 majority.
Oh, and does he want 3/5? Does he know that if he wanted a real actual rules change, that he would need 2/3? Is he aware of that? I don't know. It's hard to tell what he knows.
Yeah.
But I think I did see in an article I read the end of last week that he said, all right, well, he mentioned certain specific changes like getting rid of the filibuster on the motion to proceed, which, has been floated before.
Yeah,
Okay,
there are good ideas. And if he was for real, if this really could possibly happen, the idea that, no, we don't do a carve out for voting rights and elections reforms, but we make these changes to the filibuster overall, that would be fantastic. Except it's not going to happen because he insists the Republicans have to be in on it.
Yeah.
And I believe he did. I do think he's aware that it's 2/3. That was my misspeaking.
It could be. I mean, I also read the first thing this morning was him talking about how we've had the filibuster for 232 years.
Yeah, which is not true.
Right. Well, so
not true.
Could be anybody's mistake.
And I know that both of these arguments have been made, or the arguments have been made rather to both of these senators. All of these things. This is the history of the filibuster. This is how it happened. This is how it's been used. It is a Jim Crow relic. I know that all of these arguments have been made to them, and they're not budging them.
Yeah. They just.
So I don't know what you do other than say, it was a fun 200 plus year.
We had a good run.
Experiment and good luck to you next time.
I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe they clearly have a program set in motion for the January 17th deadline, but post January 17th, I suppose. You could go back and see, well, do you want to submit a resolution, Joe, on eliminating the filibuster on the motion to proceed and see if you can get a 2/3 vote for it? He also floated the idea of changing the normal legislative filibuster that you need 3/5 and changing the 3/5 standard from chosen and sworn to present and voting, which would be helpful. And would help to shift some of the burden of maintaining a filibuster to the side, doing it. In this case, of course, Republicans, in that they would have to show up to vote against cloture. If people just started making cloture motions all the time, I guess you'd have to do it by unanimous consent if you just wanted to make them all the time. But when a cloture motion ripened and came up, Republicans don't have to show up because the burden is to find 60 yes votes on cloture, no matter how many no votes there are. If there's 0 no votes and 59 yes votes, it still doesn't invoke cloture. But if you say 3/5 of those present and voting and all the Republicans fail to show up, then the Democrats who are there vote yes, and 3/5 of those present voting yes, cloture is invoked. So at the very least, you would make Republicans show up and cast votes, which isn't even necessary now.
Right.
Because you have to schedule a cloture vote, everybody basically shows up anyway. So, and it only happens once. It's not a big deal. But you could make a lot more cloture motions.
Yes.
Make 1,000, one after the other, and now let them all ripen 5 minutes after the last one, and bring it up. And make them stay there voting no until they get tired. And you could try that. And of course, he was like, well, we could talk about the talking filibuster. He seems to be okay with that, but that has its own drawbacks.
He thinks he's going to get 17 because it has to be 2/3. He's going to get Republicans on board with that? No.
Yeah, I don't know what he thinks
Mitch McConnell has laid down the law.
Says no.
According to Brian Tyler Cohen, podcast covering top stories and interviews with the biggest names in politics, McConnell just vowed that he will take over the floor of the Senate and obstruct as much as possible by filling the agenda with dozens of random bills if Democrats create a carve-out for the filibuster to pass voting rights. So, McConnell has made it very clear to his caucus what's going to happen here.
Yeah. I don't know how
they are not going to. You do have the one thing. He bent a little bit on the Electoral Count Act.
Yes, right.
Which is of course he can do, because that's not going to address voting rights issues.
Right.
And to their credit, most Democrats, including John Tester, say, yeah, that's BS.
Yeah,
it's
no
important
substitute.
reform. It's necessary reform. It is not sufficient reform.
Yeah.
Because until everybody can vote, the count that we're going to be counting so correctly in the Congress is going to be corrupted.
Yeah, right. And right, nobody, I don't think any actual voters would mistake electoral college reform for making it easier for me to vote. I don't understand what you...
No. But, you had this kabuki last week from Senate Republicans. Susan Collins, of course, tried to create a bipartisan gang when, that was on Tuesday or Wednesday. And I think on Monday she told Axios, oh, no, this is fine. The electoral count out worked perfectly well in 2020 for that election for 2021, and the law worked fine. We don't need to do anything with it. So the next day, she's creating this bipartisan gang to fix it.
Okay,
hey, it was incredibly transparent to everybody except maybe Joe Manchin, who I'm sure loves the idea.
I'll be in it. What gang? How many people are in it? I'll do it. Yeah, I don't know. That's pretty. That's some statement too. I mean, that's like actually Dianne Feinstein level. The electoral college counting worked fine last year. Do you remember when they put poop on the wall?
Yeah. Do you remember what happened?
And there was a guy with the Grand Poobah hat was in the chair. Like that wasn't Mike Pence. It was
no.
He had a spear, no shirt on, nothing. You don't remember any of this?
Gallows hanging out there outside the Capitol doors.
Right. No, I mean, maybe she left early. She missed the whole thing. I heard something happened, but I was out at the time. I don't know. That's an odd thing to say. And then, of course, someone spoke to her in her office and said, oh, actually, giant catastrophe. Oh, well, in that case, a gang.
Yeah. Mitch McConnell said, let's pull what we did on Biff on him again. Let's peel him away by having this bipartisan gang. We can drag these negotiations on forever and say, okay, if you just do this, then you don't have to give people the vote. Yeah, right. Sure, I guess not. No one will notice. I don't know. Very odd thing to do and to say, obviously, but I mean, wow, what a weird the gang thing. It just makes it perfect. Like, did you notice there was a gang of 700, by the way, came in and took over the place? They're all arrested now. That was the gang that ran the electoral count. How you could say it went fine? What are you talking about? Well, though, that reminds me, we do see a lot of that, I did see it in the wake of the January 6th remembrances, a lot of the rhetoric invoking what was often a throwaway line of like, well, despite all of this, democracy prevailed here. Our democracy is so strong and our institutions so firm that we prevailed. We came back and finished the electoral count and elected Joe Biden, which strikes me as, counterproductive language at the moment. I mean, It's like it wasn't democracy that persevered. It was the cops and the National Guard, I guess, they didn't even kick them out. They just left, and then they secured the place after they left. Well, now we'll lock the doors. And, so the perpetrators leave, and then out of inertia, we're like, I guess we should start counting again. I mean, all right, fine. That's not really a real robust survival story, if you ask me. It is not. I didn't see as much of that as I would have expected. And Pelosi had a little bit of that. Okay. Yeah, I mean, maybe it didn't happen as much at the memorial services. I think the reality of the fact that Trump is still out there pushing the big lie, and that pretty much it is now canon among Republicans, has made Democrats careful of making that argument that, the system held. That's a much better approach, is to be wary about that. And, and it's not the lived experience of their constituents either, for a country in which we're seeing
not only elections officials, but all the public health officials resigning under a torrent of death threats about which very little or nothing can be done. And when you do try to do something, Republicans say that's subversion of democracy. I don't know how well it survived. It doesn't feel like democracy is alive and well out here.
It does not.
So,
and they're taking over school board. I mean, you know, yeah. I guess if they're winning elections, that's sort of democracy. But you know,
well, if they're winning
the fascists winning elections is not necessarily a good sign for democracy.
Right. True. You know, we don't know about whether or not that was a democratic result because one side is fascist and dedicated to seizing power, whether they win democratically or not. And if you win your seat because you threatened all other challengers with death and they fled the state, you know, I'm the only one left, I won, you know, that ain't democracy either. And you can't really, I don't know, it's not something you can point to and say we're really thriving out here. And the threats are widespread and everyone knows, and they've been widely reported and we can all see it. And, you know, we have elections basically still happening here because I guess we're still able to depend on the firmness, for the most part, of murder statutes in the states. Okay, well, I didn't murder or have my opponent murdered because that would create a bigger problem. But they're not out campaigning and shaking hands because they're afraid they're going to get shot. Is that democracy? Right. No. Sorry. So I caution people about that language, and hopefully everyone will reflect that judgment and agree with it. But, yeah, much left to do, and no sign that the filibuster is in for major changes by the 17th or in any foreseeable date. But
no,
we continue to try.
I don't know, you know, can you, no, no. Okay. Because Manchin and Sinema say, not necessary. And Sinema's made a little bit more noise about it lately, I think, because everybody has been assuming, including me, that she's not going to want to stand alone in the event that they get Manchin.
Yes.
That she'll go along with because she doesn't want to be the only one. I still think that would be true, probably, but she, I guess in solidarity with Manchin, has been making more noise about how, no, absolutely not. She's not going to do this without Republicans agreeing.
Could be.
So,
yeah.
So I think I think she figures she's covered as long as she keeps supporting Manchin, and she can buck him up, and the two of them can ride off in history together as the people most responsible for destroying America. I don't know. Wow. What's really frustrating is that it is Republicans who want to destroy our democracy.
Right. It only comes
there
down
is
to
not a single Republican who is going to stand up for voting rights. Something that happened unanimously from the 1960s until the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act was a no-brainer for decades.
Right. Yes, easily done, and as you mentioned, it's been unanimous votes in the past, and I don't know if I can put my finger on one thing that happened.
Every Republican opposing it. Every single Republican, which gets lost in the fact that Manchin and Sinema are the ones who are pushing it, who are they're giving Republicans cover, and that's pretty much as unforgivable as refusing to protect voting rights.
Well, that's why people are so exercised about it. And even when people say, well, save your outrage for Republicans, like, well, you know, there's a level at which this is perhaps the more outrageous, although it does, you know, that has that weird effect of baking in Republican resistance to widely accepted American values and norms that they somehow get away with. Like, we were all raised and everybody has the right to vote. Okay, well, there are still a few people who were raised back in the day when that wasn't true and it was explicitly not the case.
And they liked it that way.
Right, but we're, you know, ridding ourselves one by one of them, or they're making their exits. It's just their time is up. And there are still people who believe that, of course, who are young and have plenty of time left and are in their 40s and maybe even on the Supreme Court of the United States. But yeah, so it's not. We're not done with the ideology, obviously, but it was something that until fairly recently, in historical terms, it would have been a total embarrassment for a Republican to be seen jumping ship and voting the other way on a voting rights reauthorization. No, it would be a huge embarrassment. You'll kill us with the minorities. You can't do it. Even if it was that cynical, they would confront such a person. From unanimously in favor of it, even if they grumbled about it, to unanimously opposed. And I don't know, yeah. I mean, if you ask, I guess, congressional historians about that, have you ever seen a swing like that inside of 10 years on something so fundamental, or on anything at all? I mean, the only thing I can think of is loan guarantees to Israel. That was the last thing that I saw an entire Republican Party flip on in 5 years. But
yeah.
That used to be bedrock Republicanism, to oppose loan guarantees to Israel up through the early 90s. And then I guess some evangelicals said, well, if we say we love Israel enough, we could pray for them all to die in final conflagration. No, all right, well, then loan guarantee is not such a bad idea. Besides, which, if they default, we'll all be raptured anyway. So let's do it. And that was weird, but an esoteric little point.
No, I think you're right. I think probably that is the only similar thing.
I don't know.
Where we've seen this.
It's a very weird phenomenon. Man, all right. Let's see. Other things happening. Well, we had the case, the district court case in D.C. yesterday, in which Trump's lawyer argued that, there's nothing that Trump could have stood up there on that dais and said on January 6th that wasn't constitutionally protected speech. And he has absolute immunity from civil suits because Constitution and because he's president. Okay. Even at a campaign style rally, I saw that they made some argument. Well, it was about voting procedure or something, and so that should have been an official act. Is
right? That's
how
what the Trump lawyer, who, by the way, had one of the wackiest, craziest, most conspiracy theory laden challenges to the election in Nevada, of all places. This was Trump's lawyer yesterday.
I'll have to look into the Nevada one.
Arguing that, Trump, in his role as president, as protector of elections, never mind that they are run by the state. It's the federal interest. That was the argument. He's the president. He can say anything, even if it's a campaign. He can say anything, and it's protected. I
guess. Well, people have floated that theory. There are people who said he can speak about people who are accusing him of rape any way he wants, and that's a protected speech too. And I guess it's worked in the past for him.
I think the judge is struggling with that constitutional question of
good.
I mean, the judge, I have to say, and watching commentary on Twitter, he knows the schedule of 1/6 better than just about anybody. Anytime Trump's lawyer tried to come up with, some specific thing from that day, he knew exactly when that happened, how the duration of it, exactly what phone calls came in. He prepped for this hearing. He knew very well what happened, when it happened, and how long it took for Trump to finally say, okay, go home.
Yes. Big issue. All right, well, I'm glad he's up to speed.
That played large in his questioning of Trump's lawyer. The fact that this drug on for hours with Trump watching it on TV, giddy, still tweeting out incitement, that factored rather large in his questioning, but I'm still not sure whether on the constitutional questions where he's going to come down.
All right. Well, interesting test it will be, and a novel theory being
And this
floated
is civil, not criminal challenges, by the
okay.
way. So this is he immune from any civil liability? Is he going to have to answer for the damages?
I see. So, yeah, right. The suits by the police officers, the Capitol police officers, for instance, could be
And members
impacted
of
by this.
Congress. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe it's pretty direct. All right. Well, I guess it's a good question, and I would like to address the criminal liability of it at some point as well, but this is usually where they start, the civil liability. Interesting theory, and hopefully it will be disposed of quickly and efficiently by the judge and close off that avenue. Not that they won't try to make it anyway, even if they lose.
Right.
And maybe it just won't rise to the notice of the Supreme Court and it'll be left alone. We'll see. All right. Well, I appreciate your visit here today. We'll keep, I guess, don't hold your breath about the filibuster changing, but do watch and see how it goes.
If you are in West Virginia or Arizona, raise some hell.
Sure. Absolutely. Why not? And, and then we'll see whether there's any small bore reforms that get addressed afterwards or whether they get distracted by something else instead. But, all right, well, we know what's ahead of us, and we'll speak again immediately after the deadline passes and be able to talk about the pageantry and whether it worked and whether they used any musical theater to help.
Aaron Burr does factor in this.
That's true. Now, maybe if we can get Lin-Manuel Miranda, if you're listening, quickly, a song about Aaron Burr eliminating the previous question motion in the Senate in 1805, if you would, sir. Okay.
Yes, please. Thank you, sir.
We'll check in with you next week. Thanks again, Joan.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, that's just never enough time with Joan, and there's so many things we want to check in on, but that had to be the main topic of conversation. Glad we got a second to talk about that court case, though. The West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam is up next, in case you thought there were more stories beyond the ones I discussed for some reason. There's another program coming. We'll see you tomorrow.